do the final hours of Adolf Hitler unfold as an empire collapses above him? Berlin, April 29, 1945. 30 feet beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, Adolf Hitler prepared to die. Soviet artillery shook the bunker complex with each strike. The ventilation system struggled against acrid smoke filtering down from the burning city above. In these cramped concrete rooms, a handful of loyalists, secretaries, and guards waited alongside their Führer. The end was inevitable. Hitler was 56 years old. He appeared far older than his years, with a pale, gaunt face and a constant tremor in his left hand. Many observers and some modern scholars suspect Parkinson's disease or a similar neurological illness as the cause of his tremor and shuffling gait, although he was never formally diagnosed. Newsreels from 1944 and 1945 show his shaking left hand and slow shuffle with striking clarity. He moved with a pronounced stoop, shuffling through corridors that represented the last remnants of his crumbling empire. 12 years earlier, he had stood at the peak of power. Now his world had contracted to these underground chambers. This is the account of his final hours, reconstructed from eyewitness testimony, military records, and documents recovered after Berlin's fall. The sequence of major events is well established, including the marriage ceremony, the dictation of his last will and testament, the farewells, the suicide, and the burning of the bodies. However, the precise timing of certain events and the content of private conversations remain subjects of historical debate. Where evidence is clear, we present it. Where accounts conflict, we acknowledge the uncertainty. The bunker itself was a maze of concrete chambers. 2 levels descended beneath the Chancellery Garden. The upper level housed staff quarters, kitchens, and common areas. The lower level contained Hitler's private rooms, a small conference area, and a narrow corridor connecting various chambers. The walls were thick concrete, designed to withstand heavy bombardment. Yet even these fortifications could not silence the constant rumble of Soviet artillery. Outside, the Battle of Berlin raged in its final days. Soviet forces had encircled the city. They were tightening their grip block by block, building by building. German defenders fought with desperate ferocity, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. It was only a matter of time. At noon on April the 29th, Hitler had approximately 27 hours to live. The final countdown to the Third Reich's end had begun. Hour 1, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m., April 29th. The afternoon military briefing brought no hope. General Wilhelm Mohnke reported Soviet forces advancing from all directions. The Red Army had surrounded central Berlin. German defensive positions were collapsing street by street. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. No reinforcements were coming. Despite the catastrophic news, Hitler listened in silence, seated at the conference table in the bunker's upper level. The briefing room was small and cramped. Maps covered the walls, marked with colored pins and lines that represented German and Soviet positions. These maps showed unit positions that in reality no longer existed. Many divisions had been destroyed. Others had simply dissolved, their soldiers fleeing westward or hiding in cellars. Hitler asked few questions. His responses were brief and disconnected. Witnesses recalled that he seemed physically present, but mentally elsewhere. 8 days earlier, on April 22nd, Hitler had suffered a breakdown during a military conference. He had finally admitted the war is lost. He had raged at his generals, blamed them for the defeat, and declared he would stay in Berlin to the end and then off. Some generals had urged him to escape to Bavaria, to the so-called Alpine National Redoubt, but Hitler refused to leave Berlin. By April 29th, his decision to die in the bunker had already been made. The question was no longer if, but when. Following the briefing, Hitler retreated to his private quarters. He ate little at lunch, perhaps some soup and bread. Though accounts vary, his diet had been severely restricted for weeks due to stomach problems and stress. Eva Braun joined him for the meal. According to secretaries who saw her during this period, she maintained a cheerful demeanor despite the circumstances. The contrast between Hitler and Eva was striking. While he seemed increasingly detached and hollow, she maintained an almost defiant normalcy. She dressed carefully each day. She chatted with the secretaries about trivial matters. She seemed determined to preserve some semblance of ordinary life, even as the world collapsed around them. Meanwhile, the bunker routine continued with mechanical precision. Guards changed shifts. Secretaries typed reports that would never be filed. Kitchen staff prepared meals from dwindling supplies. Above ground, the city burned. Below, the rituals of bureaucracy persisted as though normalcy could be maintained through repetition. By 1 o'clock, Hitler had withdrawn to his study. He would spend much of the afternoon there, either alone or in quiet conversation with Goebbels. Hour 2. Hitler met privately with Joseph Goebbels in his study during this hour. The meeting was not recorded. No one else was present. However, based on subsequent actions and testimony from those who saw them afterward, historians believe they discussed the arrangements for Hitler's death and the future of the regime after he was gone. Behind closed doors, Hitler was about to make a decision that would astonish even his inner circle. Hitler had already inquired about the procedures for a civil marriage, likely on April 28th, signaling his decision to marry Eva Braun before they died. This choice surprised many, since Eva's presence in the bunker had been discreet until then. Joseph Goebbels was one of Hitler's earliest followers and most devoted disciples. He had been Reich Minister of Propaganda since 1933, orchestrating the regime's messaging and maintaining public support through years of war. Now, in the bunker's final hours, he remained at Hitler's side. Unlike some others who fled or sought escape, Goebbels had already resolved to die alongside his Führer. Goebbels had brought his wife Magda and their 6 children into the bunker days earlier. This decision revealed his intentions. He would not survive Hitler. His family would not survive him. This total commitment to the regime, even unto death, was characteristic of Goebbels' fanaticism. During this afternoon meeting, Hitler and Goebbels likely discussed practical matters. Who would witness the marriage ceremony? How would the testaments be recorded and preserved? Who would carry them out of Berlin? These were questions that required answers if Hitler wanted his final wishes documented. The two men also discussed the immediate aftermath. Hitler had already decided that Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz would succeed him as head of state. This decision would be formalized in Hitler's political testament. Dönitz was in northern Germany, commanding what remained of the German Navy. He was a capable officer and a loyal National Socialist, but he had not been part of Hitler's inner circle. Nevertheless, Hitler trusted him to manage the surrender process. Hitler's testament would also formally expel Heinrich Himmler from all positions for his act of treason. Later in the afternoon, around 3 or 4 o'clock, Hitler would meet with Martin Bormann to discuss his will and final directives in greater detail. Bormann's influence had increased significantly in these final days, and he would play a crucial role in recording Hitler's political testament and carrying out his last wishes. Eva Braun spent time during this hour chatting with the secretaries about Munich and her family. She maintained her determined cheerfulness, speaking of trivial matters while avoiding discussion of what would happen in the coming hours. She handed out personal mementos to the secretaries, items of clothing and jewelry, saying, "Remember me." This detail comes from eyewitness testimony, particularly from Secretary Traudl Junge's memoir. The secretaries found her behavior difficult to process. Eva was calm, even cheerful. She joked and smiled. She seemed at peace with what was coming. Whether this was genuine serenity or a mask to spare others' feelings, no one could say. But her composure in the face of certain death was remarkable. Eva was 33 years old. She had been Hitler's companion for years, mostly kept away from public view. Now, in these final hours, her presence was finally acknowledged. The afternoon hours passed slowly. The bunker's artificial lights cast harsh shadows. Ventilation fans hummed constantly. Above, artillery continued its relentless barrage. The sounds of battle were muffled but ever present, a constant reminder of what awaited anyone who emerged above ground. By 2 o'clock, Hitler's meeting with Goebbels concluded. The plans were set. The marriage would take place after midnight. The testaments would be dictated and signed. Everything was being arranged. Hitler's final hours were being choreographed with the same attention to detail he had applied to every aspect of his rule. Hour 3. The bunker's tense atmosphere intensified during this hour. Everyone in the bunker trod carefully. Hitler could be calm one moment and furious the next. His volatile moods had become more pronounced in recent days. Staff members spoke in hushed tones. They avoided unnecessary conversation. They moved quietly through the corridors, trying not to draw attention. The physical strain was visible on everyone's faces. Sleep was difficult in the bunker. The constant noise made rest nearly impossible. Stress levels were extreme. People snapped at each other over trivial matters. Nerves were frayed to breaking. The atmosphere had been particularly tense since the previous night. SS General Hermann Fegelein, Eva Braun's brother-in-law, had been executed late on April 28th, though some accounts suggest it may have been in the early hours of April 29th. Fegelein had been arrested after attempting to desert following Heinrich Himmler's secret surrender attempt. Eva Braun had pleaded for Fegelein's life, but Hitler refused mercy. His outrage at Himmler's betrayal extended to anyone associated with it. Fegelein was likely shot in the Reich Chancellery garden by SS guards. His body was never recovered in the post-war search. No one in the bunker felt safe now, just hours before. Hitler had ordered the execution of one of his own. Hitler spent much of this hour in his private rooms. He was preparing himself mentally for what was coming. Eva remained nearby, ready if he wanted company, but respecting his need for solitude. Their relationship in these final hours was quiet and understated. No grand declarations, just the companionship of two people facing the end together. However, not everyone had accepted the situation with the same resignation. Throughout the bunker, people grappled with their choices. Some still believed in the Nazi cause. Others simply had nowhere else to go. A few were trapped by circumstance and wished desperately to escape. Above ground, the battle continued its relentless progression. Soviet troops were now fighting less than a mile from the Reich Chancellery. German resistance was fierce but futile. Every hour brought the Red Army closer to the bunker's location. By 3 o'clock, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, though no one in the bunker could see it. Time moved differently underground. Day and night blurred together. The only markers were the scheduled briefings and meals. Hour 4. The late afternoon brought administrative tasks. Hitler dictated parts of his personal will and political testament during this hour. Traudl Junge, one of his secretaries, was summoned to take dictation. She sat at a typewriter in a small office adjacent to Hitler's study. Hitler paced as he spoke, his voice flat and measured. The political testament named his successors and attempted to justify his actions. It blamed Jews for starting the war. It claimed Germany had been forced into conflict. It portrayed Hitler as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of catastrophe. The document was self-serving and delusional, but it revealed Hitler's mindset in his final hours. He dictated slowly, pausing frequently to gather his thoughts. Junge typed mechanically, her fingers moving across the keys. She later recalled feeling numb during the process. The words seemed absurd given the reality unfolding around them, yet she typed them faithfully. The personal will disposed of Hitler's property and possessions. He left items to various associates and institutions. He appointed Martin Bormann as executor. The will was surprisingly mundane for someone who had wielded absolute power over millions of lives. Meanwhile, practical preparations continued. SS guards were given instructions about the disposal of Hitler's body after his death. Gasoline was requisitioned and stored near the bunker exit. The mechanics of death were being arranged with bureaucratic efficiency. News had reached the bunker the previous day of Benito Mussolini's gruesome end. Mussolini and his mistress had been executed by Italian partisans on April 28th, and their bodies publicly displayed, hung upside down in Milan on April 29th. Hitler was horrified. He was determined not to allow his own body to be captured and desecrated like Mussolini's. This news reinforced his resolve to have his and Eva's corpses burned after their suicides. Eva Braun wrote farewell letters to family members during this hour. She sealed them in envelopes and entrusted them to others for delivery. The letters were calm and affectionate. She mentioned her decision to stay with Hitler. She expressed no regrets. By 4 o'clock, the dictation session was complete. Junge typed the final pages and set them aside for Hitler's review and signature. The administrative formalities of death were nearly finished. The stage was now set for Hitler's final act. Hour 5. The dinner hour approached. Kitchen staff prepared what would be one of Hitler's final meals. Given the circumstances, food supplies were limited. The meal was simple, perhaps pasta or vegetables with bread. Wine was served, though Hitler typically drank little alcohol. Eva joined Hitler for dinner in his private quarters. A small group of staff members and close associates also attended. The atmosphere was subdued, but not entirely grim. People made efforts at normal conversation. They avoided dwelling on what everyone knew was coming. Hitler ate very little, as was his habit in recent weeks. His appetite had largely disappeared. Eva ate more normally, maintaining her composure. She chatted with the secretaries and made small talk. Her determination to preserve normalcy was unshakable. The dinner conversation touched on mundane topics. People discussed Berlin before the war. They recalled peacetime memories. They avoided discussing the military situation or the immediate future. It was as though everyone had agreed to pretend for this brief hour that everything was normal. Yet the pretense was thin. Guards came and went with reports. Reality kept intruding despite everyone's best efforts to ignore it. After dinner, Hitler retired briefly to his study. He reviewed the testament pages that Jung had typed. He made minor corrections and notations. Everything needed to be in order before the marriage ceremony. The evening hours stretched ahead, hours that would be filled with ceremony, farewells, and final preparations. Hour 6. Evening descended on Berlin. Though the battle's intensity did not diminish, Hitler spent this hour reviewing documents and making final edits to his testament. Every word had to be precise. This would be his final statement to history. He wanted it to reflect his version of events, his justifications, his legacy. The documents portrayed Hitler as a patriot who had fought for Germany's survival against overwhelming enemies. They blamed international Jewry for the war. They blamed betrayal for Germany's defeat. They accepted no responsibility for the catastrophe Hitler had created. Reading these documents today, the delusion is striking. Hitler genuinely seemed to believe his own propaganda. He saw himself as a tragic hero rather than a war criminal. This disconnect from reality had characterized his leadership for years, but in these final hours, it was absolute. Eva remained nearby during this period. She had completed her letters and now simply waited. Her calmness was remarkable. Witnesses later described her as serene, almost peaceful. She had made her decision and seemed at ease with it. The bunker's other occupants continued their various tasks. Some packed belongings in preparation for possible escape attempts. Others simply sat in common areas, smoking and talking quietly. A few tried to sleep despite the noise. Guards maintained their posts at corridor checkpoints and the bunker entrance. They followed orders mechanically, performing their duties even though the military structure they served was collapsing. Discipline held, even at the end. Hour 7. The evening military briefing was scheduled for this hour. General Monke again reported to Hitler on the tactical situation. The news was uniformly negative. Soviet forces had advanced further into central Berlin. German defensive lines had collapsed in several sectors. Casualties were mounting. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Hitler listened to the briefing with minimal reaction. He asked few questions. His responses were brief and vague. The military situation no longer seemed to concern him deeply. His focus had shifted entirely to his own end. The contrast between Hitler's engagement during the war's earlier years and his detachment now was stark. Once he had micromanaged military operations, obsessing over tactical details. Now he barely seemed to register the information being presented. After the briefing concluded, Hitler met briefly with Bormann. They discussed arrangements for delivering the testament documents out of Berlin. Bormann was to ensure copies reached Admiral Dönitz and other designated recipients. This was critical to Hitler's plans for succession. Bormann accepted these responsibilities without hesitation. He had been Hitler's private secretary since 1943 and remained fiercely loyal. Unlike some who fled or wavered, Bormann stayed at his post. He would attempt to escape Berlin after Hitler's death, but for now he focused on executing Hitler's final wishes. Eva spent time during this hour with Traudl Junge and the other secretaries. They talked about their lives before the war. Eva spoke warmly of her family and her time in Munich. The conversation was deliberately light, avoiding the grim reality of their situation. The evening was settling into its routine. Another meal would be served soon. Then the waiting would continue through the night hours until the marriage ceremony after midnight. Hour 8. A light supper was served during this hour. The meal was informal and brief. Hitler ate almost nothing. The secretaries and a few staff members joined them. The atmosphere was strained, despite efforts to keep things normal. No one could maintain focus for long. Hitler excused himself before the meal concluded. He returned to his private quarters. The bunker's routine continued around them. Staff members performed their duties. Life in the underground complex went on according to its established patterns. However, everyone knew this night was different. The marriage would take place after midnight. Hitler's death would follow within hours or days. The end was approaching, and everyone felt it. Some of the younger staff members were frightened. They whispered to each other about escape plans. They wondered if they would survive the next few days. They debated whether to try fleeing Berlin or surrendering to the Soviets. None of the options seemed good. By 8 o'clock, the supper dishes had been cleared. The evening hours stretched ahead. People settled into various corners of the bunker, waiting for midnight and the ceremony that would mark the beginning of the end. Hour 9. The evening settled into a tense calm. Hitler remained in his quarters with Eva. They were making their final personal preparations for the marriage ceremony. Eva had selected a dress to wear. Hitler had changed into a fresh uniform. These small acts of preparation took on outsized significance in the circumstances. In other parts of the bunker, people tried to occupy themselves. Some read, some played cards, some simply sat in silence, lost in their own thoughts. The strain of waiting was exhausting. Everyone wanted the tension to break, yet everyone dreaded what that breaking would mean. Magda Goebbels spent time with her children during this hour. The 6 Goebbels children ranged in age from 4 to 12. They were remarkably well behaved despite the stress and confinement. They played quiet games and spoke softly. They seemed to sense that something serious was happening, but did not fully understand what. Magda's decision to bring the children into the bunker and to keep them there as Soviet forces closed in revealed her and Joseph's fanatical commitment to the Nazi cause. They had already decided their children would not survive Hitler's death. This horrifying resolve would be carried out in the coming days. It was an unthinkable plan, one almost beyond comprehension, even in that fanatical environment. Security around the bunker remained tight. Guards checked identification at each checkpoint. No unauthorized personnel were allowed into the lower bunker level where Hitler's rooms were located. The protocols established during peacetime remained in force even as the regime collapsed. Above ground, the battle continued without pause. Fires raged across Berlin. Soviet artillery pounded German positions. German soldiers fought from rubble and ruins. Every block was contested. Every building became a fortress. The fighting was savage and close quarters. By 9 o'clock, the bunker had settled into an uneasy quiet. People spoke in whispers. Footsteps echoed in the concrete corridors. The waiting continued. Hour 10. Late evening brought more waiting. Hitler emerged briefly from his quarters to speak with his valet, Heinz Linge. They discussed practical matters, the arrangement of his study, the location of certain documents, the procedures to be followed after his death. Linge listened carefully and acknowledged each instruction. He had served Hitler for years and remained loyal to the end. Eva spent part of this hour writing additional letters. The secretaries gathered in one of the common rooms. They talked quietly among themselves. The mood was somber. They knew what was coming. Some of them would be asked to witness the marriage ceremony after midnight. They would be among the last to see Hitler alive. Traudl Junge later recalled that this period felt surreal. Time seemed both to drag and to race forward. Hours felt like days. Minutes passed in seconds. The normal perception of time had broken down completely. Joseph Goebbels worked on his own writings during this hour. He was composing an addendum to Hitler's testament, a statement of his own loyalty and intentions. Goebbels wrote that he would not leave the Führer's side. He affirmed his decision to die alongside Hitler. These were not empty words. Goebbels meant every sentence. Martin Bormann also remained busy with administrative tasks. He organized the documents that needed to be removed from the bunker. He designated messengers who would attempt to break through Soviet lines. Everything needed to be ready. By 10 o'clock, the night was deepening. Midnight approached. The marriage ceremony would begin soon. Everyone in the bunker felt the approaching moment. Hour 11. The final hours before midnight passed slowly. Hitler and Eva prepared themselves for the ceremony. This would be a brief, civil marriage. Nothing elaborate, just the legal formalities. But it held significance for both of them. Hitler had never married before. Eva had waited years for this recognition. Now, in the final hours of their lives, it would happen. A city official named Walter Wagner had been summoned to perform the ceremony. Wagner had arrived at the bunker on April 28th after being contacted by Goebbels. He was a minor bureaucrat in Berlin's civil administration, but he was authorized to conduct marriages. He had spent the past hours in the bunker, waiting to be called. Wagner was understandably nervous. He had been brought into the bunker, informed he would marry Hitler and Eva Braun, and told to wait. The situation was unprecedented. He tried to maintain professional composure, but the stress was obvious. The witnesses were selected during this hour. Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann would serve as official witnesses. This made sense. They were Hitler's closest associates, still present in the bunker. Their signatures would validate the marriage certificate. The room where the ceremony would take place was prepared. It was a small conference room in the bunker's lower level. Furniture was arranged. The necessary documents were laid out. Everything was ready. Eva changed into the dress she had selected, a dark, simple design, appropriate for the somber occasion. She applied makeup carefully. She wanted to look her best for the ceremony. This attention to appearance, even in these circumstances, was characteristic of her. Hitler remained in his uniform. He wore the simple military jacket he favored in private. There were no medals or decorations, just the plain uniform of a soldier. He appeared calm and composed as the hour approached. By 11 o'clock, everything was in place. 1 more hour until midnight. 1 more hour until the ceremony. The waiting was almost over. Hour 12. The final hour before midnight arrived. The bunker's atmosphere shifted as the appointed time approached. Those who would attend began gathering near the designated room. Hitler spent these minutes in his study, reviewing documents one final time. He wanted everything in order. His testament was complete. His will was finished. The succession arrangements were documented. All the administrative details of his death had been handled. Goebbels and Bormann waited in the corridor outside the small conference room. They spoke quietly to each other. As witnesses, they needed to be present when called. They understood the significance of what was about to happen. Walter Wagner reviewed the marriage documents nervously. He had performed many civil ceremonies during his career, but none like this. He was about to marry Adolf Hitler in an underground bunker while Soviet forces closed in. The situation was absurd and terrifying in equal measure. The minutes ticked toward midnight. Artillery fire continued its rhythmic pounding. At approximately 11:45 p.m., Hitler emerged from his study. He walked through the corridor toward the conference room. His movements were slow and deliberate. Eva joined him moments later. Together, they entered the room where the ceremony would take place. Midnight approached. The final day of April 29th was ending. In minutes, it would be April 30th, the day Adolf Hitler would die. A wedding in a besieged bunker, an event unimaginable under any other circumstance, was now only minutes away. Hour 13, midnight to 1 a.m., April 30. The marriage ceremony began shortly after midnight. Wagner conducted the proceedings with nervous formality. He read the required legal language. He asked the necessary questions. Hitler and Eva responded with the prescribed affirmations. The ceremony was brief and mechanical, a bureaucratic procedure rather than a celebration. When Wagner asked Eva to state her full name, she began to write Eva Braun on the marriage certificate, then stopped and crossed it out. She wrote Eva Hitler, born Braun, instead. This small detail later became one of the documented facts of the ceremony, proof that the marriage actually occurred. Goebbels and Bormann signed as witnesses. Their signatures validated the document. The marriage was now legally complete. Hitler and Eva were husband and wife. They had perhaps 36 hours of married life remaining. After the ceremony concluded, there was a brief celebration. Champagne was served to those present. Toasts were offered. The mood was subdued, but not entirely grim. For a few minutes, people tried to pretend this was a normal wedding. Hitler and Eva accepted congratulations from those present. Eva smiled. Hitler remained composed but showed little emotion. The ceremony had been important to both of them, but it was a formality rather than a joyful occasion. They were preparing to die, not beginning a life together. The small gathering dispersed after perhaps 30 minutes. Hitler and Eva returned to their private quarters. The secretaries went back to their rooms. The brief interlude was over. Wagner was escorted out of the bunker shortly after the ceremony. His role was complete. He had married Adolf Hitler. Days later, he would be trying to escape Berlin. His brief appearance in history's final chapter ended with his own death. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the bunker had returned to its tense quiet. The marriage was complete. The next major event would be Hitler's death, now less than 15 hours away. Hour 14. The early morning hours were quiet. Most of the bunker's occupants tried to sleep, though few succeeded. The stress and noise made rest nearly impossible. Hitler and Eva remained in their private rooms. Whether they slept or talked or simply sat together is unknown. These hours were theirs alone. No witnesses observed them. No records documented their conversations. In other parts of the bunker, people lay awake thinking about their futures. Some still hoped to escape Berlin. Others had resigned themselves to capture or death. A few maintained delusional optimism that somehow the situation might improve. But most understood the reality. The end was coming. Joseph Goebbels worked late into the night on his own documents. He was composing final statements and instructions. Like Hitler, he wanted his actions and motivations documented. He wanted history to remember his loyalty and commitment. Magda Goebbels sat with her sleeping children. She watched them in the dim light. They were innocent of the horrors their parents planned. In less than 2 days, she would poison all 6 of them, but for now they slept peacefully. Outside, the spring night was cool and clear. Stars shone above Berlin despite the smoke and fire. Soviet troops maintained their positions, preparing for the next day's advance. German defenders huddled in rubble, exhausted and demoralized. By 2 o'clock, the night was at its deepest point. Dawn was still hours away. The bunker waited in its artificial twilight for the final day to begin. Outside, dawn crept closer, bringing with it the last day of Adolf Hitler's life. Hour 15. The small hours before dawn passed slowly. Very little happened during this period. It was a time of waiting. Most people in the bunker were attempting to sleep. Those on duty performed their tasks mechanically. The night seemed endless. The guards at the bunker entrance maintained vigilance despite exhaustion. They knew Soviet forces were close. At any time, enemy troops might appear. The defense of the bunker remained the guards' responsibility, even as the broader military situation collapsed. Above ground, the Battle of Berlin continued through the night. Soviet forces did not pause their assault. Artillery fire maintained its steady rhythm. Infantry units maneuvered through ruins. The grinding advance continued regardless of the hour. Inside the bunker, the temperature remained constant. The air was stale despite the ventilation system's efforts. The concrete walls muted sound but could not eliminate the rumble of artillery. The environment was oppressive and claustrophobic. Some of the bunker's occupants gave up trying to sleep. They sat in common areas, smoking cigarettes and talking quietly. They spoke about their lives before the war. They remembered better times. They avoided discussing what the next day would bring. The secretaries dozed fitfully in their cramped quarters. They knew they would be needed during the coming day. Hitler would want documents typed. Messages would need to be sent. Their work was not yet finished. By 3 o'clock, the darkness was beginning its slow retreat. Dawn was still hours away, but the night's depth had passed. The final day of Adolf Hitler's life would soon begin. Hour 16. The early morning darkness continued. This was perhaps the quietest hour in the bunker's final days. Most occupants were asleep or resting. Hitler and Eva remained in their quarters. Whether Hitler slept during these hours is uncertain. He had suffered from insomnia for years. The stress of the final days likely made sleep nearly impossible, but whether he lay awake or dozed fitfully, he remained unseen. In Berlin above, the night's fighting continued. Soviet troops pushed forward through darkness. German defenders fought desperately from building to building. The battle never stopped. Day or night made no difference. The advance continued. Some people in the bunker were praying during these dark hours. Not everyone was a committed Nazi. Some were simply caught in circumstances beyond their control. They prayed for survival. They prayed for deliverance. They prayed for mercy from whatever came next. Hour 17. The pre-dawn hours arrived. The bunker began to stir as the night watch ended and the day duty began. Guards changed shifts. Staff members woke and prepared for another day. The routines continued despite everything. Hitler rose during this hour, though the exact time is uncertain. The morning military briefing was scheduled for later in the morning, but preliminary reports were already coming in. The news was uniformly catastrophic. Soviet forces had advanced significantly during the night. German defenses were on the verge of complete collapse. Above ground, dawn was beginning to break over Berlin. The sky lightened gradually. The fires that had burned through the night became visible in the growing light. Smoke rose from countless buildings. The city's devastation was starkly revealed. In the bunker, the artificial lights burned as always. Dawn meant nothing underground. Time was marked by schedules and duties, not the sun's movement. The day began because the clock said it was time, not because light filled the sky. By 5 o'clock, the bunker was fully awake. People moved through the corridors. Duties were assigned and undertaken. Another day in the underground complex had begun, but everyone knew this day was different. This was the final day. Hour 18. Morning routines continued in the bunker. Staff members performed their assigned duties. The rituals of organization persisted. Goebbels met with Bormann to discuss the arrangements for delivering Hitler's testament out of Berlin. They selected messengers who would attempt to break through Soviet lines. These men would carry copies of Hitler's final documents to Admiral Dönitz and other designated recipients. The chosen messengers understood the danger. Breaking out of Berlin was extremely risky. Soviet forces controlled most escape routes. The chances of success were slim, but the mission was considered essential. Hitler's succession plans needed to reach Dönitz. Reports from the front lines continued to arrive. The military situation was beyond salvage. Soviet forces were within blocks of the Reich Chancellery. The bunker's location would be discovered soon. Time was running out. The staff understood this reality. Some made quiet preparations for escape attempts. Others simply resigned themselves to capture. A few remained defiantly loyal, determined to fight to the end. The bunker's occupants represented the full spectrum of reactions to imminent defeat. By 6 o'clock, the morning was well established above ground. In the bunker, the day's routines continued, but the undertone of finality colored everything. This was the last day. Everyone felt it. Hour 19. The morning progressed toward the scheduled military briefing. Soviet forces controlled everything above ground. The guards reported increasing activity above ground. Soviet troops were clearly close. Artillery fire was heavier than ever. The sounds of battle were louder even through the thick concrete. The end was approaching not in days but in hours. By 7 o'clock, the military briefing was approaching. This would be the final such meeting. Within hours, Hitler would be dead. The rituals that had structured his daily routine would soon end forever. Hour 20. The morning briefing began during this hour. General Monke delivered his report to Hitler on the Central Sector's defense. The military situation was hopeless. Soviet forces were converging on the Reich Chancellery from multiple directions. German defensive positions had collapsed. Organized resistance would end within hours. Late in the morning, General Helmuth Weidling, Berlin's defense commander, would meet with Hitler and deliver the decisive final assessment. Weidling would report that the garrison would run out of ammunition by that night. He would request permission for a breakout. Hitler would grant it, though by then it would be too late for most. Hitler listened impassively. He asked no questions. He offered no orders. The military situation no longer mattered to him. His focus was entirely on his own death. The war was over. Germany had lost. His empire had fallen. All that remained was his final act. The briefing was shorter than usual. There was little to discuss. Everyone in the room understood the reality. The Soviet advance was unstoppable. The bunker would be overrun soon. Those present would be dead or captured within days at most. After the briefing concluded, Hitler met privately with Monke. They discussed the defense of the immediate area around the bunker entrance. Hitler wanted to know how much time remained before Soviet forces would reach the Chancellery complex. Monke was honest. Hours, not days, perhaps a day at most. The end was imminent. Hitler accepted this information without visible reaction. He thanked Monke for his service and dismissed him. By 8 o'clock, the morning briefing was finished. Hitler's final military meeting was complete. Never again would he hear reports from the front. Never again would he issue orders to armies. That part of his life was over. Hour 21. Mid-morning brought final preparations. Hitler remained in his study, handling last administrative details. The documents were ready to be taken out of Berlin by the designated messengers. The Goebbels children played in one of the common areas, supervised by their mother and one of the staff. They were remarkably well behaved despite the confinement and stress. They sang songs and played quiet games. They seemed almost oblivious to the danger surrounding them. Joseph Goebbels conferred with Bormann about the timing of Hitler's death. They needed to coordinate their own deaths with Hitler's. Goebbels was determined to die shortly after Hitler. He would not survive his Führer. His family would not survive him. The messengers who would attempt to break out of Berlin were given final instructions. They received copies of Hitler's testament sealed in waterproof containers. They were briefed on possible escape routes. They understood the importance of their mission and the near impossibility of success. Linge and Günsche, Hitler's valet and adjutant, received detailed instructions about the disposal of Hitler's body after his death. The gasoline had been prepared and stored. The location in the garden had been identified. The procedures were clear. When Hitler died, they would immediately burn his body. The tension in the bunker was nearly unbearable. Hitler had perhaps 6 hours to live. The final countdown was entering its last phase. Hour 22. The previous evening, after the wedding ceremony on April 29th, Hitler had gone room to room thanking staff members. He had shaken hands with them, thanked them for their service, and in some cases given away personal items as mementos. Those farewells had been formal but emotional for some who had served him for years. Hour 23. Everything was ready for the cremation. The fuel was in place. The location was prepared. When Hitler died, the disposal of his body would proceed immediately. By 11 o'clock, noon was approaching. Hitler had approximately 4 hours to live. The final phase was beginning. Hour 24. The late morning hours passed with agonizing slowness. They spoke to a few remaining staff members. They ensured everything was in order. His hands trembled more than usual. His movements were slow, but his voice was steady when he spoke. He remained in control of himself. The midday meal was being prepared, though few had any appetite. Only the most loyal remained at the center. The tension was nearly unbearable. Everyone knew death was approaching. By noon, Hitler had approximately 3.5 hours to live. The final countdown was entering its last phase. The afternoon would bring the end. Hour 25. Hitler summoned his remaining close associates for final farewells. Goebbels, Bormann, and a few others gathered in his study. The meetings were brief and formal. Hitler shook hands with each person. He thanked them for their loyalty. He offered no long speeches or dramatic pronouncements. The bunker's other occupants waited tensely. Some tried to busy themselves with tasks. Others simply sat in silence. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew the end was imminent. Above ground, the spring afternoon was mild and clear. Soviet troops continued their advance. Artillery fire maintained its rhythm. The Battle of Berlin was in its final hours. Within days, the city would fall completely. In the bunker, time seemed suspended. The artificial lights cast their constant glow. Everything was exactly as it had been for days, yet everything was different. By 1 o'clock, Hitler had roughly 2.5 hours to live. The afternoon was progressing. The final moments were approaching. The end was near. Hour 26. The early afternoon continued. The staff members who remained in the bunker tried to occupy themselves. Some read, some wrote letters that would never be sent. Some simply sat and waited. The tension was overwhelming. Magda Goebbels spent time with her children. They were becoming increasingly restless. They wanted to play outside. They didn't understand why they had to stay underground. She comforted them with lies about when they could leave. Joseph Goebbels remained in his office, finalizing his own documents. He was preparing for his own death, which would follow Hitler's within hours or days. His resolve remained absolute. He would not survive the Führer. Bormann handled administrative matters mechanically. There was little left to do. The documents were ready. The messengers were prepared. The machinery of Hitler's final wishes was in place. Now there was only waiting. The afternoon light above ground was bright and clear. By 2 o'clock, Hitler had approximately 1.5 hours to live. The final countdown was entering its last phase. The moment was approaching with terrible inevitability. Hour 27. The final hours arrived. Inside the study, Hitler and Eva prepared themselves for death. The specific details of these final minutes remain unknown. No one witnessed them, but based on the physical evidence found afterward, the sequence can be reconstructed. Eva took cyanide. She bit down on a poison capsule. Death would have been rapid, perhaps seconds, certainly less than a minute. The cyanide caused immediate cardiac arrest. She collapsed on the couch beside Hitler. Hitler both took cyanide and shot himself. He bit a cyanide capsule while simultaneously firing his pistol into his right temple. The gunshot was heard by those waiting outside. The sound was unmistakable, a single shot, sharp and final. The exact time of death was approximately 3:30 p.m. Some accounts place it slightly earlier, others slightly later, but 3:30 p.m. is the generally accepted time. By this moment, Adolf Hitler was dead. Linge and Günsche waited a few minutes to ensure death was complete. Then they opened the door to the study and entered. The scene inside was exactly as expected. Hitler sat on the couch, a bullet wound in his right temple, a pistol near his hand. Eva sat beside him, lifeless. Both were clearly dead. The 12-year Reich had ended. The Führer was gone. The final chapter of Nazi Germany had closed. What remained was only disposal and aftermath. Yet even in death, Hitler's story was not over. Uncertainty and propaganda about his fate were just beginning. The cremation. Linge and Günsche immediately summoned Bormann and Goebbels. The four men entered the study and confirmed that both Hitler and Eva were dead. There was no doubt, no possibility of revival, no need for medical examination. Death was obvious. The disposal of the bodies began almost immediately. Hitler's adjutants swiftly wrapped his and Eva's bodies in army blankets. They carried them up to the Reich Chancellery Garden through the bunker's emergency exit. Soviet artillery was still hitting the area, making the journey dangerous. They laid the bodies in a shallow shell crater near the exit. About 180 liters of gasoline had been requisitioned earlier specifically for this purpose. The fuel was doused over the corpses. The men then ignited the fuel. Accounts differ on the exact method, possibly a torch or a tossed match, and stepped back as a fireball erupted. A thick column of black smoke rose into the Berlin sky. The makeshift cremation burned for several hours. SS guards periodically added fuel to ensure the bodies were consumed as completely as possible. Some later claimed that a few witnesses raised their arms in a final Nazi salute as Hitler's body burned, but others present denied this. In any case, the ceremony, if any, was brief and not officially recorded. What is undisputed is that the fire burned for hours, tended by guards who added more gasoline periodically. The exact burial spot was not marked. Subsequent bombardment churned the ground, obliterating any precise location. Soviet forces would later claim to have recovered partial remains in early May and transferred them to Moscow. Decades later, Russian authorities revealed preserved dental remains and skull fragments said to be Hitler's. Forensic analysis confirmed these remains through dental records that matched Hitler's known dental work. However, controversy persisted for years about some of the physical evidence. Aftermath. Inside the bunker, the remaining staff prepared to flee. Over the next 48 hours, the bunker's remaining occupants met various ends. On May 1st, Magda Goebbels sedated and poisoned her 6 children with cyanide. Then she and Joseph Goebbels committed suicide. He by gunshot after taking cyanide. She by cyanide alone. Martin Bormann attempted to break out that night on May 1st, 1945, and is believed to have died during the escape. Human remains uncovered in Berlin in 1972 were later proven by forensic dental analysis and 1990s DNA tests to be Bormann's. He had died in Berlin in May 1945, likely by died during the attempted escape. Others in the bunker surrendered to the Soviets on May 2nd when Red Army forces finally overran the Reich Chancellery complex. The war in Europe formally ended with Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8th. The news of Hitler's death spread slowly through the chaos of Berlin's final days. Soviet soldiers who captured the bunker on May 2nd found only a handful of staff members and medical personnel. Most had fled. Those who remained told conflicting stories. The Soviets were skeptical. Soviet intelligence officers began a systematic search. On May 4th, Soviet soldiers discovered badly burned bodies in a shell crater near the bunker's emergency exit. The remains were too damaged for immediate identification, but were taken for examination. Soviet pathologists conducted autopsies under strict secrecy. They found dental work that could be compared against Hitler's dental records. Yet Stalin ordered the findings kept secret for months. The Soviet leadership publicly claimed uncertainty about Hitler's fate, suggesting he might have escaped. This disinformation served propaganda purposes during the early Cold War period. The truth emerged slowly through interrogations and testimony. By 1946, Western intelligence agencies had compiled detailed reports based on witness accounts. The basic facts were established. Hitler had died by his own hand on April 30th, 1945. Epilogue. Hitler's death marked the end of one of history's darkest chapters. The man who had dragged Europe into catastrophe was dead. The Third Reich he had built was finished. The war in Europe would end within days. The relief felt around the world was palpable, though tempered by the almost incomprehensible cost. 60 million people died in World War II. 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Cities were destroyed. Nations were ruined. Families were shattered. An entire continent was traumatized. This was Hitler's legacy. In the end, the bunker itself was systematically destroyed by Soviet forces in the following months. The entrances were sealed. The rooms were demolished. Today, the location of the Führerbunker is marked only by a simple information panel in a parking area in Berlin. There is no monument, no memorial, nothing to glorify what happened there. The witnesses to Hitler's final hours carried their memories for the rest of their lives. Traudl Junge struggled with guilt for decades and spent her later years warning students about blind obedience. Heinz Linge was captured by Soviet forces and spent years in prison camps. Rokas Misch survived until 2013, one of the last living witnesses. Hitler's final hours reveal not a heroic last stand, but a squalid, desperate end. He died not as the great leader he imagined, imagined himself to be, but as a defeated tyrant who chose death over accountability. His final hours were marked by delusion, denial, and the destruction of everyone and everything around him. The comparison between Hitler's grandiose ambitions and his squalid death is striking. He had promised Germany a 1,000-year Reich and delivered 12 years of destruction. He had promised to make Germany master of Europe and left it divided and occupied. He had promised glory and delivered ashes. History would remember April 30th, 1945, not as the day a great man died, but as the day a great evil ended. The nightmare was over. The monster was dead. But the cost of that victory was almost incomprehensible. The war Hitler started more people than any conflict in human history. The Holocaust he ordered was industrialized murder on a scale never seen before or since. The damage he inflicted, physical, psychological, moral, would take generations to heal. Yet in the immediate aftermath of World War II, Hitler's fate was not fully transparent, leading to rumors and speculation. The Soviet Union initially sowed doubt about Hitler's death. Stalin himself told Western leaders in 1945 that Hitler might have escaped to Spain or Argentina. Soviet commander Georgy Zhukov announced on June 9, 1945, that they had not found Hitler's body. This was part of a Soviet disinformation campaign to keep the world guessing. As a result, many people at the time believed Hitler could still be alive. A poll in June 1945 found that around 68% of Americans thought Hitler might be alive. Despite the bunker eyewitnesses, the absence of public photos of Hitler's corpse, and the secrecy of the Soviet investigation fueled alternative theories. The most famous alternate theory is that Hitler did not die in the bunker at all, but escaped Berlin and eventually fled to South America. The book Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler, speculates that Nazi sympathizers, possibly even Argentina's future President Perón, aided Hitler's escape and that multiple U-boats carried Nazi officials and loot to South America. A History Channel series called Hunting Hitler explored declassified FBI files containing post-war sightings and tips about Hitler in Argentina, though all remained unverified. While many Nazi war criminals did flee to South America, including Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele, no credible evidence has ever emerged that Hitler was among them. A French forensic study of Hitler's dental remains in 2018 proved Hitler died in 1945 and explicitly stated he did not flee to Argentina in a submarine. Other colorful survival myths emerged as well. Some suggested Hitler escaped to Spain, which was under Franco's friendly fascist regime. Others proposed a secret Antarctic base, stemming from post-war speculation about Nazi expeditions. Another category of theories doesn't deny Hitler died in Berlin, but disputes how. Some early Soviet accounts floated that Hitler might have been by others or died fleeing. However, no credible evidence supports these claims. All eyewitnesses in the bunker testified that Hitler shot himself while Eva took cyanide in the afternoon of April 30th. These alternate death scenarios are extremely unlikely, as all reliable accounts point to suicide. A more nuanced conspiracy theory suggests that a body double was killed in Hitler's place while the real Hitler escaped. This idea took hold because the Soviets reportedly found several bodies, and one was at first misidentified as Hitler. One of Hitler's doubles may have been executed by guards as Soviet forces approached, which fed confusion. Thus, the double theory, while dramatic, falls apart under forensic scrutiny. In 2018, a team of French scientists re-examined these teeth in Moscow and reconfirmed that Adolf Hitler definitely died in 1945. A 2009 DNA test on a skull fragment long believed to be Hitler's turned out to be from a woman, likely Eva or another victim. That finding initially reopened conspiracy speculation. However, crucially, Hitler's jaw was always the main evidence, and it remained intact and unquestionably his. The Soviets secretly kept Hitler's jaw and a few teeth, and that is how historians know for certain he died. The rest of the body was destroyed. The consensus of historians and scientists gives essentially a 0% probability to any escape scenario. In other words, the chance that Hitler survived beyond April 30th, 1945 is as close to zero as one can get. On the other hand, the evidence that he indeed died in the bunker is overwhelming, approaching 100% certainty. Nevertheless, the legend of Hitler's supposed escape remains a topic of fascination. From tabloid exploits to television documentaries, the image of the Führer somehow slipping away continues to captivate the imagination, a testament to the dark mystique he still holds, even though all credible evidence points to his demise in Berlin. In the end, the saga of Hitler's final hours truly ended in that bunker beneath Berlin. Anything else is fiction. The final hours of Adolf Hitler thus serve as both historical record and warning. They remind us of the dangers of unchecked power, fanatical ideology, and the cult of personality. The bunker in Berlin, with its cramped rooms and desperate occupants, was the natural endpoint of the totalitarian project Hitler had begun. It ended where it had to end, in death, destruction, and defeat.